If you're a parent of a child who struggles with sensory processing disorder and you want to actually find how to mitigate and possibly correct this problem instead of just looking to mask the symptoms with some surface level tools or toys, then please watch this video until the end. Hey, I'm Dr. Sam McDonald, brain health expert, helping you rewire your brain so you can live a better life. If you love this content, make sure to like and subscribe so you get the notifications for each week's new video. So if you're unfamiliar with what sensory processing disorder is, in a nutshell, it's where the brain does not perceive the body appropriately. Most commonly, symptoms associated with this are usually tactile issues, so kiddos that have problems with particular types of clothing. Parents will notice either they will only want to wear certain types of clothing, or it's got to be very soft, or it's got to be, really like body contouring or very like tight or things like that. Or in other kiddos, maybe it's more baggy. Usually it's going to be those kind of situations that are most common. It can also show up in textures in terms of foods, in terms of things like carpeting. It could also be like the kiddo not wanting to wear socks, or always wanting to wear socks and shoes, or sometimes always wanting to be barefoot. It can also show up in situations in things like noise, or being around certain other kinds of environmental stimuli. All those things can be associated with what's called sensory processing because it's how the brain is perceiving the internal, meaning body, and external environment. So if you're looking to what you can do to actually correct and mitigate this problem as much as possible, you need to start with the nervous system. You need to start with how the brain is actually perceiving the body, not just looking at what things you can do to try and put a Band-Aid on this particular situation. So the first place you have to start is looking at primitive reflexes. These are the training wheels for the brain and nervous system, and these are the foundation for how the rest of the brain develops. So primitive reflexes are found in the first year of life, and these are like the basic programs of the brain that get you up and walking. They live, so to speak, in the brainstem area. And why these are so important is because sensory processing is an input problem that leads to an output problem. So an input meaning what's the information coming from the body, how is the brain perceiving it, and then what's the brain doing about it. So when the brainstem is involved, what that means is all the information coming from the body has to go through the brainstem before it reaches the brain. And it's kind of like playing the game telephone. So when the information is coming from the body, it goes to the brainstem, it starts to get really garbled and dysregulated, and it kind of gets messed up. And the brain's not perceiving that information appropriately, thus leading to an abnormal output later on, which is going to lead to, oh my gosh, this clothing feels really terrible, or oh my gosh, I need more baggier clothing, or I can't go without having socks on my feet because I can't stand how the environment feels, or oh my gosh, I have to have socks and shoes on all the time because I just need that barrier from what's happening. So that's really important because it ties into an area of the brain called the thalamus, which is like the governor or the regulator for the brain. So in those particular examples that I gave, what happens is either too much or not enough information is getting to the brain, causing this sensory processing output disorder. So what happens if too much information is coming up? That means a child is going to want to have only certain types of clothing and want to be very controlling in their behavior because too much information gets up to the brain, leading them to be dysregulated, and they can't stand all this stuff coming in. Versus the child that does not get enough stimulation, they're going to be the ones that are like constantly like seeking that stuff out. They want to be rolling on the floor. They want to be constantly experiencing and looking for new things. They're that seeking type of behavior that's leading them to looking for new stuff because their brain's needing that stimuli really in order to stay alive. So when they're looking for all that information, you need to make sure that your child does not have any retained primitive reflexes, which would indicate that brain stem is underdeveloped and underregulated, which is leading to either that too much or not enough information reaching to the thalamus. So make sure your child has all of their primitive reflexes integrated, meaning that they're developed enough for their age so that the brain is perceiving their environment appropriately. The next thing you want to look at for your kiddo is what is their balance like? Meaning how well can they stand up on their own 2 feet? Can they stand together with their eyes closed without falling in any particular direction? Because balance is really tied into a part of the brain that's like the regulator or the conductor of the brain called the cerebellum. It also ties into your vestibular or balance systems. But the reason that this is so important is because that's a really, really strong connection down into the body. And when the vestibular system or cerebellum is not properly tuned to how it's connecting to the brain and how it's perceiving information, that's going to lead to this dysregulation and disconnection down into the body, thus leading to these sensory processing outputs, because all information has to come up through the brainstem, through the cerebellum, through all these other neural pathways, ultimately leading to these higher brain centers. But if these aren't properly tuned, if your child is not perceiving their body appropriately in their internal environment, that's going to lead to these other types of sensory behaviors because they're looking to be able to calm these systems down if they're too really tightly or highly wound up or more activated. So if your balance centers are really, really off, that's going to lead to your child potentially looking for ways to calm down their nervous system because it's always perceiving this threat or this danger or just lack of connection in their environment. And the last thing I want to talk about is looking at, is your child stuck more in a chronic stressed or survival mode state, aka fight or flight, or are they more in this relaxation and healing mode, aka brake pedal, where they should be? Why this is really important is because when they become more fight or flight dominant, your child's going to be looking for more sensory seeking type of behavior, but they're also going to be very difficult to be able to regulate themselves. Because imagine if you felt like you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or a bear all the time, you're not going to be a calm, conscious, relaxed, thoughtful person. Same thing with your kiddo. If they perceive that their environment is dangerous internally or externally, they're going to be constantly looking to be able to get away, and they're not going to be able to regulate themselves as healthy as they could be because their environment is totally distorted in their perception. So when this happens, it starts to shut down other parts of the brain, in particular the back of the brain here called the parietal lobes, which is our sensory centers of the brain. It starts to divert resources from that area into some of the lower brain centers, especially in the front part here called the limbic system, which is where that fight or flight system lives. So as it starts to shut down some of these sensory centers, they're receiving less stimulation and less information. It goes more into these survival mode states, and the child is just going to be more tightly wound up. They're harder to calm down. They're harder to get to relax, they're harder to talk to, and they're just harder to be able to feel their environment. So think of the example we always give to our patients is the environment may be really calm and chill, like a classical music, but inside your child's head, it feels like heavy metal. So imagine if heavy metal was playing in the background everywhere you went, you would not be a very calm, rational person. Well, same thing in your kiddo because they're stuck in this chronic fight or flight state. Heart rate variability is one of the most powerful tools and most accurate tools for looking at what's that nervous system regulated state. But you can also look at things like hand temperature, how clammy they are, heart rate in terms of how fast it is. All these other things can look at and see really what's going on with that nervous system and how dysregulated it is. So you need to find an expert or a practitioner who understands the nervous system and can look at your child and understand and see how are all these different systems coming together in order to give you the best possible roadmap for your child to get them to the optimal expression of their health that they have. So on that note, you should be healthy by choice, not by chance. And for that reason, I will see you on the next video.